你好，欢迎收听随行汉语。Welcome to Takeaway Chinese. I'm Niu Honglin. We often talk about how big the world is, but today I'm talking to a special someone who's been trying and managing to make the world a little more connected. Please allow me to welcome our guest, Dr. Chris Evans. Hello, welcome to the show. Hello, Doctor. Great to have you on the show.
Well, thank you so much for your welcome. It's a privilege to be on the show and on the podcast, and lovely to introduce myself to your viewers. I'm the headmaster of Reading School, which is 900 years old. Our school was founded in 1125, exactly 900 years ago. And through these 900 years, the school has built quite a reputation locally in the United Kingdom. My school enters this new period of its history, looking forward to its 1000th anniversary. Just a few weeks ago, we buried a time capsule with guests from China placing artifacts from their school in the time capsule to be buried for 100 years, so that 100 years from now, our school might open this time capsule on its 1000th anniversary. So in my school, we think about a big span of history, and we have to ask the questions about what education is for and what schools should do. And we have to think about global citizenship and about connecting young people across the world so they can understand, enjoy, come to love each other, appreciate each other's cultures. Because we want to make sure that the young people that we send out into the world make the world better. And that only happens when we build positive relationships. And so we feel very privileged to have built some wonderful relationships with friends in China over the last few years. And we're committed in this next 100 years to developing these relationships so that children here in the United Kingdom and in China can learn from one another. That's the way we make the world better.
I think that is a really good answer. And I do agree that we need to understand each other a bit better to be able to cooperate, to be able to forge a win-win cooperation kind of relationship. And the best way to do so is to go into each other's culture instead of just looking outside or listening to stories from a third party describing what they believe the culture is about. And the world is very convenient nowadays. And what the only thing you need to do is to reach out and go talk to the people in that culture directly. And that is what you're doing. So I appreciate that very much. And I know you're leading the Beyond 900 campaign, and you would be leading the school into its 10th century. That is very, very magnificent, to be honest. And I know that you are cooperating with a school in Guangzhou. Can you tell us a bit more detail about the cooperation?
Yes, certainly. I came to love China for the first time in 2018, visiting a couple of times and finding some wonderful people. Some of those relationships then have become friendships, which over the last few years have sustained conversation, often just a ni hao and a happy Chinese New Year and a little message backwards and forwards. But as a consequence of some of those relationships, last year we began a new opportunity in Guangzhou, talking with a wonderful team. They've already got a really flourishing school, which has very deep values that are similar to ours. In the West, people sometimes have the perception that the Chinese education system is focused only on results and that young people are pushed very hard towards high academic outcomes. And there's been some skepticism sometimes in Britain about education models internationally. We have found great joy in learning about each other's focuses and realizing we've got very similar values. As a consequence, we've come to cooperative agreement to build a new high school which will have an international curriculum. And we think that young people in China can then benefit from all the best of the rigorous academic Chinese curriculum whilst gaining qualifications that give them access to global education. So that school will be building on Reading School's reputation, on our heritage, on our traditions, and also building buddies between academic experts in China and in the United Kingdom to nurture expertise right in the heart of Guangzhou regarding international qualifications. So we're really looking forward to sending basketball and badminton teams over to China for exchanges and bringing students from China for language exchanges to Reading School. We think young people need to stretch their wings, don't they? They need to expand their own horizon beyond the little parochial, narrow view we have of our own communities and families. And growing up must be about our eyes being opened. So we think that our young people here at Reading School can have their eyes opened through these new friendships, just as my eyes have been opened, and that Chinese guests and friends can have their eyes opened by conversation and dialogue with those here at Reading School and perhaps when they come to university at Oxford or Cambridge, which is one of our specialities, nurturing young people into those kind of institutions.
Well, you definitely had me when you said sending students to each other's countries and explore the different cultures. And here in China, we know the competition when it comes to education has always been fierce, but different schools and different local governments have been experimenting different ways to really nurture the young souls, because people have different strengths, they have different talent, and it's important to find the talent for them or help them find out what are their strengths, what are their interests. And the best way to do it is expose them to enough opportunities and to perhaps a different culture, a different environment that would definitely give them the nudge they need. And that is also part of the reasons I would assume that you are encouraging young kids in the UK in your school to learn Chinese. And you even have a Mandarin excellence program, which encourages or asking them to learn 8 hours of Chinese a week. Is that well received? Is that a hard or challenging thing for young students in UK? Is that a, torture or a prize to them? How are they receiving it?
Maybe it can be a torture and a prize at the same time. So it's definitely difficult. This is one of the hardest qualifications that our students can undertake. The Mandarin Excellence Program then requires this level of rigor. It's not like learning French or German or Spanish for an English student, because the alphabet's so different, the characters are so remarkable. But our students are desperate to learn Mandarin. They want to. There are more students wanting to learn Mandarin than we can teach. So it's definitely difficult. You're absolutely right. For British students, there are sounds which are really tricky in the Chinese language, and they find it hard. Learning those new characters is a real stretch. But we work with bright young people, and they have an appetite to do that which is difficult. And they also know that if they want to be global citizens and to stretch their wings around the world, they're going to find Mandarin a tool that unlocks conversations, friendships, and opportunity in the future. Philosophically, I'd also add my favorite philosopher. I was a German called Ludwig Wittgenstein. He said, the limits of my language are the limits of my world. He said, whereof we cannot speak, thereof we must be silent. So actually learning new words grows our mind. It grows our picture of the universe. It helps us appreciate things differently. And a school like Reading School, which is prestigious and rich in its academic curriculum, it just must stretch students with as many different words, as much vocabulary, as many different opportunities as it can. And I think we'd be failing our students today if we didn't teach them Mandarin. And I think that's why the Mandarin Excellence Program in the United Kingdom has been really popular, with China supporting and encouraging this scheme, and the British government buying into the idea that British young people will be better if they're global citizens. So you see a really positive relationship. We know there are global tensions around the world in all kinds of different ways at different points, and that's beyond your and my capacity to deal with. What we can do is build friendship, and that starts with language. And so I love this program, and I know so many schools that have taken Mandarin on have found it to be really enriching, not just for the language it gives children, but for the aspiration and the appetite it nurtures.
Well, I now hope I were 20 years younger, and I would love to apply for your school and receive education there, learn all the languages. So, yes, it's not only about communication, because nowadays we know that with artificial intelligence, technology everywhere, you can easily come to China without knowing a single word of Chinese. And it's fine. You can communicate with people, no problem, with the help of a translating machine. But that's different. That's only communicating in the relatively surface level. You will not be able to understand the culture, the society, how people perceive the world, and how they deal with the problems and challenges in life, unless you start understanding the language, understanding culture from a different perspective. So yes, I totally agree with you. That is very important. And I'm also quite curious, because we know that learning a language can be hard, but besides learning itself, is there any engaging activities or any other methods that you're using or resorting to when it comes to Chinese language teaching?
Oh, do you know, that's a brilliant question. I think that all teaching is a combination of knowledge and relationship. It doesn't matter what the subject is, whether it's physics or French or Mandarin or history, whether it's music or art or drama. Learning and the relationship in a classroom that nurtures new understanding is always a little bit about knowledge and a little bit about relationship. So I would say the secret to success is having teachers of Mandarin who build wonderful relationships with students. And here we have a brilliant Mandarin teacher, Mr. Wu. For example, Mr. Wu takes our Mandarin students to a wonderful Chinese restaurant each year. And there they have to order food in Mandarin and they read the menu only in Mandarin. And you can imagine what that does, because they're learning now with their taste buds and with their olfactory senses, with their nose and with their eyes, not just with pen and paper. But the pinnacle of the program is undoubtedly the intensive Mandarin study program, where students come from the UK to China every year for a 3-week period, and they get a really intensive study program, because that unlocks for them, I think, applied language. Immersing students in Chinese culture and sending them to China is essential. If it was just pen and paper, I don't think students would accelerate to become competent Mandarin speakers, but being people who can go to wonderful Chinese restaurants and experience Chinese food, going to China and experiencing Chinese culture, and spending time with Chinese teachers in this country who unlock curiosity about Chinese society and advocate for Chinese ideas and help young people in the West understand the East. I think that's what really does it. That's what captures people's imaginations. And I would say at the heart of that is definitely relationships. And perhaps taking one step back, I would say that when I went to university, I was very antagonized that international students very often spent time with one another, that British students weren't always generous hosts, that British students were sometimes slow to welcome people from foreign cultures who'd come over as guests for a year or so. And it struck me as being really strange. There is almost nothing more beautiful about being a human than learning what's going on in someone else's head. It's a joy to meet people who are different. And so I think we try to inspire our students with the notion that the language they're learning unlocks for them the capacity to understand how Chinese people might be thinking or seeing the world, and understand that they can now build relationships more beautifully and fully. So for me, the relationships are at the heart of it. And I think we've got work, all of us, to redress that balance where sometimes our own cultures and societies have been hostile to strangers or slow to welcome new ideas. And building relationships through language feels to me absolutely pivotal for the future. And I think our students get that.
And I totally agree when it comes to the kind of little things like going to a Chinese restaurant and reading, being able to read the menu and maybe take order in Chinese in Mandarin would be very encouraging to those who are learning it. And that leads to my next question about the experience your students have here in China, because I know that there are different types of summer camp and trips to China. And I was quite curious to know that what are some stories that they bring back, that they share when they finish the camp, and what are the things that they value the most, and what do you believe would be the most important lesson they learn, or the most important experience they gain after these kind of experience?
Oh, that is a wonderful question. So rich. There's so much there. Firstly, you mentioned Reading School's Future Stories program. You've done your homework about our school. Well done. We are a state school, so no one pays any fees to be at this school. But we think it's imperative that education provides opportunity for those who most benefit from it and who most need it. Reading is a town with significant economic disparity. There are those who are very, very wealthy, and there are those who are really deprived. So we see it as our mission to provide the best quality education for those who most benefit from it. And social mobility, providing social opportunity for young people to really flourish who might not have had financial resources at the start of their life, is fundamental. So we pay for all of our disadvantaged young people to go on international trips, so they don't have to pay for it themselves. That's our commitment, to try and make sure that we increase the cultural capital available to young people from more disadvantaged backgrounds, because actually everyone should have these opportunities. And we think there's probably more learning from those young people who are gaining these opportunities for the first time and in remarkable ways. So for those young people who've never been abroad, sending them to China for the first time can be quite remarkable. These can be really life-changing. I can say that my life changed really around the age of 18 when I visited Zimbabwe, and I found people who had next to nothing materially and yet shared it so generously. And it really changed my perspective on what it meant to be wealthy. And I realized that if you are happy and content and fulfilled, and feel providence in your life, you have more than if you're rich and feel lonely. And I'm convinced that actually young people experiencing different cultures can see themselves differently. And that's been our experience, that young people who've been to China and come back have a richer view of what culture is, a deeper understanding of their own selfhood, perhaps a more nuanced perspective on what it means for them to be themselves, because they've suddenly seen themselves through the eyes of another, through the eyes of another culture. They've been a minority in a massive city where suddenly they're looking around, everything is high and vast and significant. And that kind of experience, I think, shapes us. It stops us from being narcissistic and only interested in ourselves. It makes us interested in the perspectives of others. And I'd encourage anyone who's watching this podcast or this show, if you can travel abroad, if you can build relationships with people who are different, you really should. Not just because you'll learn about their culture, but because you'll gain a lens on your own, which is invaluable.
I think that is definitely the point of visiting a different place. It's definitely more than just about the subject, just about the trip, but also a lot more about seeing the world differently, seeing us differently, and seeing our future differently. Which is why I'm curious. You have been visiting China at least 2 times this year, and you've been to a lot of different places. In your opinion, or what was the long lasting impression of China that you have, or some surprising element you got from probably your last trip here in China?
Great question. May I pick two or three things that have really stuck with me, if that's not too greedy? Firstly, in 2018, I sat on the Bund in Shanghai on a bench with a gentleman who had no English, and I had no Mandarin, and he used his phone to translate. And we had a conversation for about 2.5 hours at 4:30 in the morning when I couldn't sleep because of jet lag. And here in the middle of one of the world's biggest cities, I had a really intimate and meaningful conversation with a stranger whose name I never learnt, who never learnt my name, about his world, his perspective, his faith, his family, his values, and shared similar conversation about the things that mattered most to me. And it felt to me like the most remarkable privilege to drop into this person's world and to have this deep and meaningful conversation. And it taught me that there is so much that makes us the same. We often think about the things that make us different, but actually, the things that bind us together are so profound. Here we are as a species, spread across the planet with so many different things going on in so many different corners of our countries. Yeah, the things that bind us together are remarkable, such that I can sit on a bench on the Bund in Shanghai and talk for 2 hours with someone I've never met before via a translation app on his phone about really deep things. And I've gone away remembering that man, praying for him and thinking of his family and hoping that things are well for him. Because I learned more about him in 2 hours than I've learned about some of my closest friends, just because we talked openly. So that remarkable capacity for human connection and the things that make us similar, even you and I across the world via screens, the things that make us similar are so remarkable. That's the thing that I think struck me first in visiting China. The second thing was the rich, remarkable history of Chinese culture. When you visit a museum and see a vase or a replica of a terracotta statue, or you see a wonderful painting, or someone brings you a gift with some calligraphy, it doesn't begin to capture the wealth of another country's culture and history. And just being in China, beginning to see the way people look around them, the way they walk, the way they talk, the way they shop, the way they eat, beginning to understand what's remarkable about Chinese culture has been a real privilege. And that's from seeing artifacts and visiting museums, but also ascending towers and looking out on cities, and from walking along pavements and seeing the bustle of the city. So the sense of China being both profoundly modern and remarkably ancient has really stuck with me. I've come away with a real love of Chinese culture. I just want more and more understanding of China. And the third thing, perhaps, is that the future of our species depends on our humble, careful commitment to one another. We have to listen to each other, because sometimes we can say the same words but mean different things. Sometimes that can be alienating or frustrating or challenging, but being patient with each other and humble means if we listen carefully, I think we understand the world better, and the world will be better as a consequence. So forgive me that that's three abiding memories. One is the importance of listening. One is the remarkable joy of meeting someone totally different and coming to care for them. And the other is truly an appreciation. And I'd say to those listening and watching who are Chinese, what an incredible country and community and culture you're a part of. My school's 900 years old and we feel proud, but you can wander around China and see things that are so ancient and so remarkable. The scale of this history is a joy for me to watch. And I'd say to anyone who isn't from China, who's watching or listening because they're interested in Chinese culture, go to China as soon as you can. You'll learn so much. That would be my final tip.
I ask this question to a lot, maybe all of my guests out there, and I get different answers. But so far, your answers really, really touch me. I think fundamentally it's about people to people exchange. Cultural communication is about one person talking towards another person, and that connection is beyond imaginable. It's always, always the heart of any real communication and real cooperation. And that being said, previously you also mentioned that you teach and also you influence the younger generation through like fables, like folk tales from different cultures, and allow them to find out the similarities, find out the values that are cherished by people from different backgrounds, and how they are connected. And I find that very interesting because as podcast makers, we also make podcasts like you're familiar with the Chinese folk tales. So do you think these kind of media content, these kind of podcast shows are important in the learning process? Or maybe for those who cannot really come to China as willingly as they can, as freely as they can, is this also a good way, in your opinion, to know about different cultures and different worlds?
Oh, you're so right about that. It is essential for us to understand each other's stories. Story is the thing that rescues us from the tyranny of time. If there are no stories, if there are no themes that we weave through history, then all there is atoms and meaninglessness. So stories are the way humans find meaning in the passage of time. And I think when we understand other people's stories, we have fresh picture on our own. Your story, my story, they're so interesting to meet other people and hear their stories, definitely. As for the bit about the future of our relationships, yeah, look, I think we have to recognize that trade and resources and indeed pressures around the environment mean we're going to have to work closer together as global citizens. It doesn't mean we all have to be the same. It's still being different and society is still having different values, but not being threatened by those values because we understand each other. So I hope that's the future of our relationships. Not that we all blend into one cultural soup, but there is profound diversity, real difference, things that we can even argue about and disagree over, but we disagree politely and respectfully and carefully because we love each other and appreciate that that difference is a brilliant thing rather than a threat.
Yes, I totally agree with you, especially that here in China, we also believe in the variety of different civilizations. There's no one civilization that is better than another. It's rather that we want to see the variety. We say 百花齐放春满园, which means that in a beautiful garden, you ought to have more than 100 types of flowers. Only one flower would not make spring. And I think that is the key about cultural communication. And you also mentioned the importance of nurturing global citizens. Again, being a global citizen also means that you cherish your own culture while you respect and understand and learn from other people's culture and civilization. So that is also the key. And it's a good occasion to talk about all this because China's Spring Festival is coming and we're already preparing to celebrate it. I was wondering, because you definitely put importance in encouraging students to learn more about different cultures, and when it comes to being a global citizen, being able to enjoy other cultures' festivals is kind of like also important. So any activities we're looking forward to or anticipating in reading school?
Definitely. At these different points in the year where we can, our students who come from different backgrounds bring their culture to the front of the life of the school. We have Chinese food. We'll then have a Chinese performance of either poetry or music. And in our library, the wonderful staff we have in the library elevate some of the kind of Chinese literature and the books they've got on Chinese fables, so that more students might borrow those books from the library. So yeah, Chinese festivals important to us. We have a couple of times in the year where our Mandarin students will dress up, trying to wear some traditional Chinese clothes, and they'll celebrate Chinese culture, so that language learning isn't just about words, but also about appreciation. And for me, myself, when it comes to Chinese Spring Festival, it seems like the right time to write to my Chinese friends. My Chinese friends write to me at Christmas, for example, and say Happy Christmas. And I really appreciate that they understand that's a significant festival for me. So it's my job to wish them prosperity, health, and happiness when we enter a Chinese New Year. And that Spring Festival, I know, brings a lot of joy and excitement in Chinese families. So there are different points in the year where at Reading School we try to celebrate. I wouldn't say we do it wonderfully, but even in our kitchen, we'll have a Chinese menu for that day or that week, depending on the festival, just to elevate an understanding of international culture. We can probably still do better there, but we're trying and enjoying that.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Evans. Like you say all the time that education matters because people matter. I totally agree with that. And I think our conversation today has also been a great example of that. So for our dear listeners and viewers out there, if you're interested, if you have enjoyed today's conversation, please let us know in the comment area. And thank you so much for being with us for this lovely half an hour. And if you have any other questions, any other comments, or maybe you're interested in the Chinese learning process, the Chinese learning program in UK, you can also let us know in the comment area or send us an email. And thank you so much. This is Takeaway Chinese. I'm Niu Niu, and thank you, Dr. Evans, for being a wonderful guest today. Thank you so much.
Thanks. All the best to everybody.
All the best, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye, guys.